Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So I was requested to mention some stories and certain examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And as I was doing that, as I was going through the seerah and kind of reflecting on different stories and different people in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that mentioning them here would not only be relevant but also inspirational and relatable, I paused because one of the first teachers that I ever read the seerah with, I was reminded of him. This particular teacher of mine, his name was Muhammad Aslam Sheikhupuri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's passed away now. He suffered from what is a lot of times referred to as infantile paralysis, polio, and then some other more technical scientific names. But it's basically the polio virus. And he suffered from that when he was young, when he was an infant, when he was a child. And due to that, his legs never grew out. And so he did not have the use of his legs. He basically didn't practically have legs. And he was not only the first teacher that I read the seerah with, and when I say read the seerah, it's not just, listening to a few stories, like actually reading the classical works of the seerah. I studied hadith with him. He was one of my teachers in the Sahih of Imam Muslim. And he was also my mentor and my primary sheikh, the teacher that I specialized in tafsir with. He was our most senior teacher in Quranic studies. He wrote more than 80 books in his life. And at the time that he passed away, he was maybe the foremost scholar of tafsir in the entire country of Pakistan. And I was just reminded of him because I remembered, where did I learn to be able to even just read and research the seerah. And till today, he is by and far the most well-read, well-researched, diligent scholar that I've ever come across. He probably used to spend, I was his neighbor. I was not only a student, I was also his neighbor. He used to probably spend about 8 to 10 hours a day with just books. He was the first one to all 5 times prayer every single day. He was the first one to be in the masjid. He would be in the masjid before the mu'adhin would be. The mu'adhin was one of my classmates. The one who would make the call to prayer, he was one of my classmates. And he used to tease him and taunt him. He had a very lively sense of humor. He was just the life of the party, for lack of a better expression. And when my friend would get there for adhan, and my friend was very punctual. He was a good mu'adhin. He was very punctual. When he would get there for adhan, he said Sheikh Aslam would always already be there, and then he would tease him. He said, "What kind of mu'adhin are you? I get here before you do." And then he had just that sense of humor about him. He said, "I don't have legs and I get here before you." And just an amazing, remarkable person. I remember being his neighbor. He had the corner apartment. It's just very vivid memories. He had the corner apartment, and so that apartment he had asked for because the little study room that he had, the library room, the study room, that way he would have a door that opened to the outside. These were very simple people. They didn't have air conditioning. Karachi is like living inside of an oven. Those of you who've maybe ever been to New Orleans or been to Houston, that's what the climate's like. So imagine New Orleans or imagine Houston or Baton Rouge without air conditioning. you would die. And so they didn't have air conditioning, so he would at least, so he's like, I can keep this door open so I don't suffocate to death in here. And so I would have to walk by that open door when I would be going to class or coming back from class or going for prayer, or whatever, whenever I was going anywhere. And I knew that he'd be writing or he'd be reading or he'd be researching, so I wouldn't want to bother him. I didn't want to disturb him every single time, like stop by and pop my head in and be like, Assalamu alaikum, like be the annoying neighbor, like howdy neighbor. Like I didn't want to be that person. So I would just kind of put my head down, and as I would approach the door, I'd kind of like hold my breath, like somehow he's going to hear me breathing. It's like he's a sheikh, he's not like Spider-Man. So, I would kind of just hold my breath and I would brace myself and I try to walk by the door real quickly and pick up my legs and kind of walk, like high step by, so I wouldn't be like, kicking up dirt and you wouldn't hear me. But he was always so alert. He'd be sitting there writing. He had this big, he would sit on the ground and he had this like giant like table, these ground tables constructed around him that were built for him specifically, and he'd be on there writing and reading something, and without lifting his head up as I walked by, he'd be like, hey! And then I would just stop and I'd be like, oh no. Because now I know I double messed up. Right? I didn't want to bother him, which I succeeded in doing so, disturbing him. And secondly, now he's going to be mad at me because I didn't say salam to him. And he'd be like, come here. And so I'd come back in and I'd be like, Assalamu alaikum. And he's like, do I have to remind you to say salam every time? Do you not like me for some reason? Am I annoying to you? Is it that hard to stop and say salam to this old man? Like he would just mess around with me. And I would be like, no, I didn't want to bother you. He's like, let me decide what bothers me, okay? How about that? How about you not tell me what to do, right? And he was just that type of a person, just very loving, very friendly, very generous, very kind, very gracious. I remember actually when we went to go memorize the Quran, this was later on when we were studying like higher Islamic sciences. When we went to go study the Quran and memorize the Quran, we were very young. And it was me and a few other of my classmates, all these young American kids, like 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds, and we had gone to memorize the Quran, and we were just wreaking havoc on this beautiful place where people did Qala Allah, Qala Rasul. They studied the Quran and Islam all day long, and then you threw a bunch of crazy American kids in there, and it turned the whole place upside down. And so I remember my sheikh, my mentor, Mufti Naeem, he asked this Sheikh Aslam, Can they spend a little time with you every day? Now this is a man writing books. And he's asking, can these 12-year-old American kids just hang out with you every day for a little bit? And he was like, I guess. They can come hang out in my office while I'm working. But why? And Mufti Naeem was like, just let them. So he said, okay. And we used to go, and we didn't know what to do there for a few days either. We would just kind of sit there watching this. And again, it was kind of, just to talk about it, I had never seen someone with that, type of physical challenge before. I'd never seen somebody physically like that before. And then we just sat there and just awkwardly, he'd look from the book every couple of minutes, and we'd look at him every couple of minutes. And then we'd look back down, and when he'd look back down in his book, then we'd look at each other and make like faces, like awkward faces, like, what are we supposed to do? And slowly but surely, we started building a relationship with him. And we started to get to know him better. And it just became a really meaningful, beautiful, powerful relationship. And eventually, of course, us being a bunch of crazy kids, that took over. So when that little time would end, that 30 minutes, he would be going home. We'd pray Asr, we'd go to the masjid, pray Asr, and then he'd have to go home. So he'd be in his wheelchair. So, we would basically he'd be like, all right, take me home. And the more we got to know him, we'd be driving him in his wheelchair, and then we'd start like popping wheelies in his wheelchair and stuff like that. And he'd be yelling and screaming at us, don't, what are you kids doing? I'm gonna fall. And it's just, we just got to know him and we got to love him, and eventually got to really be students of his and benefit from him and learn the Quran from him and learn the Sunnah from him and learn the Hadith from him, and saw just what a source of benefit Allah made him. He taught tafsir every day after Fajr for 30 years. And his lecture of tafsir was known as the tafsir that scholars would attend. Scholars from around the city would leave their own homes, their own communities, an hour before Fajr, 30 minutes before Fajr, to come pray Fajr there, where he would pray Fajr, to be able to listen to him explain the Quran and the Book of Allah. That's the potential, the value, the ability, the barakah, the blessing that each and every single human being has, each and every single follower of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam possesses. And the biggest thing that we can do is to remind ourselves of that, to find people like that, whether it be people in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like the father of Abu Bakr, Abu Quhafa, was blind. Or it be people like Amr bin Jamuh, who did not have the use of one of his legs, who was paralyzed. Or it'd be someone like this teacher of mine, Sheikh Asam rahimahullah, who couldn't walk, he didn't have legs. But realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed remarkable blessing and great barakah and talent and abilities in each and every single person. Just reminding ourselves of that. You know, Sister Juhi referenced about qalam, partnering or working with Muhsin. It's actually qalam wanting to learn from the work that Muhsin does. We might teach people certain things, seerah or hadith or fiqh or tafsir, but this is something that we felt that we could learn from Muhsin and its community. That's sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That prophetic tradition. How everyone is a part of this ummah. Everybody's a part of this community. So more than anything, I was just very honored and privileged to be able to just be a part of this effort and be a part of this gathering here today. And I wanted to just thank each and every single one of you, the brothers and sisters here who are here, who have some of these challenges themselves, the families who value them and cherish them and remind us to love them and respect them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. May Allah reward you. You're a source of strength and inspiration for each and every single one of us. You are our teachers, and not just the lines. You know, the Arabs had an expression, the scholars had an expression. Al-ilmu fi suduri la fi sutur. Knowledge is contained within the chests. Knowledge is not ink on paper. Some simple folk like myself, we might know the ink that's on the paper, but you live it and you breathe it. You walk it and you talk it. You demonstrate it. You show it. That's Islam. That's the Quran. That's the Sunnah. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. How God has granted dignity to every human being. So jazakumullah khairan. Thank you very, very much for being as amazing as you are. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to grant you strength, accept all your efforts and your sacrifices, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a means of insha'Allah educating not just the ummah at large but humanity in all together. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum. The question is, what are Islam's views on genetic testing for certain types of disabilities, Down syndrome, spina bifida? As a healthcare provider, do I recommend testing, even pre-conception? Medicine has advanced so much today. How do we react to designer babies, quotation marks, in order to avoid disabilities? So, first and foremost, a lot of these more modern developments within science, within medicine, when it comes to Islam, the area and the department of religious studies that would deal with these types of issues, it's actually a bit of an overlap. The primary department is what we call fiqh and usul, right? Islamic jurisprudence and its principles. But there's a very interesting overlap that also has with some areas of Islamic philosophy. Because advanced Islamic legality is essentially what we call Islamic philosophy. And a lot of our legality does sometimes lean on our concepts of Islamic philosophy. Now, the reason why I mention this is that a lot of the answers to these questions are things that we are still grappling with, things that we are still dealing with, things that we are still trying to figure out. And it's going to take a lot more sitting down, meeting of the minds between scientists, researchers, geneticists, all the different professionals from a medical, from a scientific perspective who are at the cutting edge of these developments. Have them sitting down with not just scholars, but the foremost specialists in the areas of philosophy and in the areas of legality and its principles. We're going to need those people to sit together. And these are conversations that are still happening. What I can answer, so it does not just simply seem like I'm just pawning the answer off. First and foremost, we need to be comfortable, just be able to say, I don't know. At least I don't have a final answer to this. But there are some conversations that have concretely occurred. I've had the privilege to be able to be a part of some of those conversations as well. So what I can tell you is that when it comes to the testing itself, that is something that is permissible. The testing itself is permissible. But in terms of now further making decisions based off of the results of those tests, that is something that is still very much under discussion and still something that is being debated. What should be the course of action once something has been discovered through those tests? That can some level of genetic engineering be done? That is still under discussion. Whether or not, and I know that this is going to be very shocking, and that is not my intent at all, and I do not mean to bring up anything that can be hurtful in any way, shape, or form, but for parents at a very early stage to be able to make a decision whether to proceed forward or not, that is still under discussion. Okay? I'm not going to comment on the efficacy of it, but just telling you that is from a purely technical perspective, fiqh, legal perspective, that is still something that is being discussed. So those are things that are still under discussion. As far as the testing is concerned, there's nothing prohibiting the testing. But what will come out from that testing and what you'll be able to do with that information, that is very much under debate and under discussion. So that can lead now someone to further pause and consider whether they even want to proceed forward with the testing or not. But it's a very difficult issue. It's a very technical issue. And I'm sorry I don't have more clarity on the issue, but that's as far as that we've gotten ourselves in terms of really answering these questions, because these are some very, very extremely challenging questions that we need to be very careful about answering, so that we do not end up, causing more harm to people in a mistaken effort of trying to help people. Wallahu ta'ala alam, God knows best. One thing I was going to share about that, and I had actually originally thought about addressing this, but like I said, I kind of got lost in the memory of my teacher. Something very interesting is that when it comes to Quranic translation, and I know a lot of families probably feel, I've had families share this with me, concerns and frustrations. And that is the issue of a lot of our translations need a lot of work. Something very interesting, and I've had people push back. I've had my own colleagues, scholars and imams kind of push back on this. When it talks about disbelief, and it talks about like umyan, a'ma, summun bukmun umyun, fahum la yu'minun. It's talking about disbelief. Man kana fi hadhihi a'ma fahuwa fil akhirati a'ma. Somebody who disbelieves in this life will similarly be will still be in denial, even on the day of judgment. And the translation says, somebody who is blind in this world will be blind in the next. Summun bukmun umyun will be translated a lot of times tragically as blind, deaf, and mute. And it's wrong. And I've had people say, but doesn't a'ma mean blind? But correction. In classical Arabic, this is what happens when people don't understand the difference between modern Arabic and classical Arabic. One of my areas of focus is classical Arabic, Quranic language. And what's very interesting in classical Arabic is that at the time when the Quran was revealed, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, you would not call a blind person a'ma. That would be offensive. And I know that there might be some native Arabic speakers, but let me see if anyone knows, or some students of knowledge, folks who read, they might know. Does anybody know the word that you would actually use for a blind person? I'm hearing it a little bit here and there. No, the word was darir. But you wouldn't call them a'ma. In fact, if you read the biographies of like scholars or biographies of the Sahaba, it says kana dariran. Kana dariran. Zinnira radiallahu ta'ala anha. You read her biography in Al-Isaba, the book of Siyara Alam al-Nubala, and it says kanat dariratan. Does not say kanat a'ma. That has a negative connotation. We do not use it for people. We don't use it for people. Darira, darir. That's what it would mean. It meant, darir meant challenged. Like had some, disability or had a challenge. But the other thing is that the word also would be used was maktum. Like Abdullah ibn Maktum. Katama. Maktum means that his eyes were covered. And the reason why what Sister Yasmin was talking about, the reason why that reminded me, because first I just wanted to clarify, we don't use that word a'ma. And that's why my contention is that our translations into English need a lot of work. But nevertheless, coming back to the point, the reason why I was going to say that was, think about Abdullah ibn Maktum, that Sahabi, the mu'adhin who was blind. His mother was a Muslimah as well. And by the way, him and his mother were amongst the first 40 people to become Muslim. They are amongst the first 40 Muslims in Islamic history. They were part of the first 40. And his own mother saw it as a source of pride. She used to introduce herself as Maktum. Because she was proud of the fact that her son was blind. She used to call herself Maktum. That was her title. So when it talks about the whole, like the children being a key, a door, a pathway to paradise, it was a source of pride for them.